Welcome to the Rooted Parent Podcast. This is Season 3, and we're discussing issues of fear in parenting. And I am here with Susan Yates. I'm so excited about this podcast. We are recording at TGC 2021 in Indianapolis and coming out of a pandemic and just reveling in the fact that we get to be with people again and make friends across the country, and I am so excited to have Susan here. She is from Washington, D.C., or is living there now. Yeah. And Susan, would you just tell our audience a little bit about who you are?
My husband and I have lived in Falls Church, Virginia for about 42 years. It's a Washington, D.C. suburb. We raised our kids there. We have 5 kids. They're all grown now, and they're all married, and we actually have 21 grandchildren. My husband just stepped down a year and a half ago as pastor of a large church, Falls Church Anglican, and we are still in the area, still involved. And it's been a great ride over the years. We've learned a lot from our mistakes, but we've seen God's faithfulness. And that's what's so special about being a little bit on the other end. Looking back, you see when you were so fearful and so scared to death, you see a record of God's faithfulness. And that's one of the blessings of getting older. You have more years to have experienced His faithfulness.
And encourage those of us who are still slogging through the fearful years. Yeah. Well, you're also the author of several books about parenting.
I've written a number of books on parenting, and then I had kids, encouragement for mothers of young children. Then my husband and I did one on character, Character Matters, Raising Kids with Values That Last, and I did one on teenagers. And my newest one is on Cousin Camp. It's really on family reunions and how to host if you're a grandparent listening out there, how to host a get-together for your grandkids. But it has all types of family reunions.
Oh, I love that. I've never seen a book on family reunions. Yeah. That's a much needed resource.
Well,
I'm
thank
sure.
you.
So your books would be available on Amazon.
Yeah, and I have a blog that I also write.
Okay.
And all of my books are on there, and it's just, you can find me at susanalexanderyates.com.
Okay, great. And we'll link that in the show notes with your books as well.
Thanks.
So our listeners can get access to your resources. So, wow, 5 kids, 21 grandkids. I'm so impressed.
Don't be. It's a zoo.
Yeah. So how close together are your kids?
Our kids, we had 5 kids in 7 years. Our 4th and 5th turned out to be twins.
Oh, okay.
So that was a little bit of a surprise.
Yes, yeah. And boys, girls?
3 girls and 2 boys.
Okay. Do they live close by?
Our oldest daughter, Allison, and her husband, and she has 5, live just 100 yards from us, which is wonderful.
Yes.
And then the rest are spread out between Charlottesville, Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, Memphis, Tennessee, and Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay, so still driving
Southeast,
distance.
Still driving distance.
That's really nice.
Yes.
That's great. Well, when you were a young mom, what were some of the fears that, say elementary age, maybe heading into middle school, what were some of the fears that you had as a mother that, I don't know, kept you up at night or kept you on your knees? Or
I think, we have all sorts of fears at every different season of raising our kids in our own life. I have a vivid imagination. I'm creative. And while that's a gift, that, either God's using that or the enemy's using that, because somebody with a vivid imagination tends to be a really good worrier.
Yes.
I mean, your teenager is late coming home, and I can create the most amazing automobile accident out on the highway that you could ever imagine. So we have fears for their safety from the time they're little on up, and then we have fears about their friends.
Right.
And their choices in friends, and are they going to be included or excluded? You name it. You can have a fear about everything. We have a fear about, are we going to ruin our kids?
Yes.
And the reality is, at any given season, every parent who's honest will say, the feeling, I've ruined my child. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's done. I know I have ruined my child. And I learned a while ago, as I experienced this myself, to really come back at that statement with, Susan, your ability to ruin your child is not nearly as great as God's power to redeem him.
Oh, that's so good.
And I always tell young moms or moms of teenagers, write that out and put it where you'll be reminded of it, because over and over again, we'll feel like we've ruined our children.
And it can be so many things, from losing your temper and blowing
Right.
up just a moment
Yeah.
to realizing that there may be something really important about parenting that you maybe have never talked to your child about. And you realize you really, or, you haven't addressed the dangers of alcohol sufficiently because it didn't really cause a problem for you. So you didn't,
Yeah.
realize that whatever it may be. Maybe you're afraid that you didn't provide the right opportunities, or that you haven't been able to give them what you wanted to in terms of time. If you're a working parent who has long hours at the office, maybe you're afraid that you haven't been able to spend the time with your child and they don't know how loved they are. There's just a million.
There's a million fears. We can live in fear, or we can choose to go to God. And here's the passage that's always a comfort to me, and this is Psalm 139, because it talks about how God knows us. He knows our thoughts even before they come out of our heads. He knows all of those fears. He knows how incapable we are, how weak we are. In Psalm 103, it says he knows we're but dust. And I love it that God knows me so intimately. And he knows I'm going to be a lousy mom at any given moment. But again, his power is greater than my frailty.
That's such a good word. And I think too, when I meditate on those things, he knows that I'm dust.
Yeah.
He also knows my kids are dust.
That's so true.
And so sometimes our interaction can be super messy. I have a friend that had a situation with her son who was a baseball player, and she had done travel baseball with her child. She had been, washed the uniform 1,000,000 times, sat in the bleacher 100 times, in the blazing heat and in the freezing snow. And when he got to college and he went through a difficult season and they had kind of a blow up, and one of the things he threw back in her face was, "You never supported my baseball." And that story was terrible for them. But it was such a lesson to me that sometimes we can do lots of things really, really well for our kids, and they just don't perceive the love behind it.
No.
And that was it set me free a little bit.
Yeah.
To see, all I can do is what I feel like God has led me
That's
to
right.
do, and kind of leave him.
And I think it's helpful in building really clear communication in the family to just be honest with your kids. Just to say, son, I've never been a parent before, and I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. But God's got you. And I'm learning while we're doing this. And I don't have it all together. Our kids know probably in their gut, because they live with us, that we don't have it all together. But it really helps for them to hear us say, look, I can make a lot of mistakes. I think really when we think about it, that forgiveness is probably the most important ingredient in the family. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to go to my husband or to one of my children and say, I shouldn't have said so-and-so and so-and-so, or I shouldn't have done so-and-so and so-and-so. And I can't remember a single time when I have felt like saying that.
Yeah.
I'm the mom, I'm the wife. I
Right.
want to be right. And yet God calls us to go to one another asking for forgiveness, not out of feelings, but out of obedience. And so we have to go to one another out of obedience. And it doesn't mean that you feel great all of a sudden.
Right.
Feelings and trust take time to be rebuilt. But going to one another and asking forgiveness is the first step to enable God to bring about, more positive feelings and to restore trust. But that can take a long time. And I think the thing that has struck me about this is, Lord willing, we're raising future husbands and wives. And they're going to need to know how to forgive one another in marriage. You and I know that.
Yes.
And if they don't see it modeled in the family, how are they going to know how to do it?
Well, in all
it's an
their
important
intimate
thing.
relationships.
All of their relationships. That's right.
Yeah. So I love that. Forgiveness is the first step, but rebuilding of the trust and having the feelings return.
Follow along at a much slower pace than we'd like often.
Yes, and that's just really true. And to be patient with that process, I found that part of my fear as a mom has always been that there's some big bad thing around the corner that I'm not seeing, or that my child has reached some sort of point of no return. They've had a rough patch with their bad temper, for example, and I think that I have a child who's permanently bad-tempered. And that patience is such a huge part of realizing that God changing them and God changing me is a process, and that I have to have patience with it. Does a lot for helping my fear.
Yeah, you just hit on it in such a perfect word. It's a process. And we are impatient people. We want God to do what we want Him to do, like today.
Right.
And raising kids is just a process, and it's a long process. And my mom used to have a phrase that has always helped me. She used to say, Susan, God is working while you're waiting. And we tend to think, oh my goodness, if we can't see evidence, then God must not be working. But it's a bit like a dark, dreary, bleak winter day when it's gray and it's cold and it's rained for the 10th day in a row, and you can't see any beauty, and you can't imagine what it will look like. But under that cold, damp air, God is doing amazing things underground, which are going to burst forth in just the right time. And so it is with our kids. We may not be able to see it in a dark season, but we can trust. And this is where I think God uses creation to speak to us. He's modeled it in His creation, and it's the same truth in our kids. One day it will blossom. One day. But the thing that's so frustrating for a mother of young children and a father of young children is you feel like you're input all the time, and you're not seeing any results.
No results.
You're
right.
teaching manners. You're trying to teach manners. You're trying to teach them to look an adult in the face, and you're not seeing any results. And so you just feel like a failure. You feel like a failure.
Well, yes, yeah. I love that picture of what's happening underground, and we can't see that those seeds are actually sprouting, and they're gonna break through.
They're gonna break through. Not as soon as we would like, most likely, but they will break through.
Right. So we just keep watering.
Just keep watering, nurturing. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it over again. And, another thing I think that helps in terms of our fears is to remember that we can't do this by ourselves. We need a community. We need a church. We need a body of other parents who are raising their kids in a similar way. Now, we need grandparents who are praying for them, or godparents who are praying for them. We need extended family, but we also need somebody with close proximity who knows our children well and who will be that other voice in their life. Because there will be times when they don't want to listen to mom or dad, and you get the roll of the eyes.
For sure.
Yeah. And, and that's when your best friend steps in. And she affirms and covers what you want to say, but they don't want to listen to you. So we really need other parents. We need a pack of parents who are raising their kids with the same values, who want their kids to love Jesus. And so I think one of the things that's so crucial in parenting, particularly as you hit those middle school and high school years, is having your children be involved in a strong youth ministry.
Yes, absolutely. And having those adults in your church that believe what you believe and and see the image of Christ in them and want to call that forth and put the time in with your kids and get to know them and call that forth. I could not agree more. Obviously, Rooted likes youth ministry.
I know, that's why I'm such a big fan of Rooted.
But so your kids were involved with youth ministry?
Oh, yes. And, we didn't give them a choice. It was just part of being a Yates. And we didn't say, this is because your father's in ministry. We just said, this is an important part of our family. And I think as one of the words for parents, particularly, again, once you hit those middle school years and those high school years, is the word exposure. we need to expose our kids to exciting Christian ministries where we are not. And as they get a little bit bigger, they need to use their summers not simply to make money. They may need to do that. But the question is, are they making money to contribute to food and housing or for their latest gadget or newest iPhone? But I find that particularly in the high school years, you need to use at least a portion of your summers for spiritual enrichment. And send your kids to Young Life. Send your kids to a Rooted Retreat. Send your kids to whatever ministry that you personally know is solid. It's different in different geographical regions. But we did that, and it made a huge difference in our kids' lives. I remember once we sent our oldest daughter, Allison, off to a camp in New England called Focus, and she was not really thrilled about going, and we got another mother to send a friend of Allison, so she wasn't going alone. But we just didn't make a big deal about it. We just said, this is a part of our family tradition. And when you do it with the first one, then the other ones know it's coming. But she went, and it was so funny. She called her dad about midway through and said, Dad, I have to tell you about this book. You've probably never heard of this guy. His name is J.I. Packer, and he's written this really good book called Knowing God. And we just laughed. But she was excited to get into that because it wasn't mom or dad telling her.
Yes, I think that is so true. And haven't you found things that you've said to your kids 100 times and then they'll come home and tell you that some other trusted adult said it to them?
That's right.
They act like they've never heard it before.
That's so true.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so I'm glad she discovered J.I. Packer. Well, I think that the church is so important because we do need to begin to let our kids interact with the larger world outside of our family. And so having community outside of the home is tremendously important. But what would you say to parents who are afraid of the world beyond the family and the church? Again, many of our kids go to public schools. Or they go to camps that are not necessarily Christian camps, and that's okay too. What would you say to parents who are afraid of cultural influences in the world?
Well, that's a great question, particularly in today's world, because there's real reason to be afraid. So I would say, first, just a principle is our kids are going to encounter frightening things in this world today, and it's helpful to talk about that with them, to prepare them for how they handle really difficult situations, how to stand strong. But they also need to realize underneath, and I need to realize this myself, that this world is not our home.
Yes.
Heaven is our home, and things are never going to be made right this side of heaven. We long for them to be, and so we always feel just a little bit like we don't belong in a way. And that's because we don't.
Right.
We belong in heaven. So I would say first, just really educate your kids carefully. Don't send them to a camp that you haven't thoroughly checked out.
Yes.
Really do your homework, particularly in today's world. Be very careful. For example, when you're looking at colleges, some of my grandchildren are looking at colleges and in college. And, one of the first priorities, I was just having this conversation with several teenagers this past week who are juniors and seniors in high school. And I said, what's your first priority as you look at a school? And as we discussed this, it came up that their first priority really needs to be Christian community. And so as they go to look at a certain college, they need to go and check out the fellowships on that campus. And they need to go during the week when they can attend the fellowship meeting. And so I think we need to do a lot of talking about what your priorities are as you leave home, and those are older kids. But again, while they're still in your home, yes, we fear, and that's just normal because we love our kids. And we take those fears to the Lord, and we pray like crazy for God to protect them. And this is a funny thing that we prayed for our kids, which did not make them very happy when they were growing up. But it was that if they were doing anything wrong, they'd get caught.
I prayed that too. And they did.
They did. I know.
I remember
when, and I actually just wrote a blog about this and why it's important to pray your kids get caught. But I remember when our son Chris was 11, he and his best friend Nate were making clay balls behind a bank, and they thought it'd be really cool to throw these cannonballs at passing cars. And so they heaved the first cannonball at a passing car, and it was a city police car, a Falls Church police car, who whipped over, parked, grabbed these two boys by their collar, marched them to my house. And, it was all I could do not to laugh. Because it was like, praise God, they got caught.
Yes.
I mean, this was serious. They could have caused an accident. They could have caused a death. And I was so thankful that God had caught them.
Yes.
And, they were grounded for the weekend. They had privileges taken away. They had to have consequences. That's part of parenting. But one of their consequences was to write a letter to the policeman to thank him for catching them and to tell the policeman the lessons they had learned and how this was going to change their behavior. And this is so funny. About 10 years later, I saw the same policeman, and I introduced myself. He was in our neighborhood about another issue. And he said, "Oh, I know you, Miss Yates." He said, "I still have the letter your son wrote me in my desk."
Oh, that's such a great,
Yeah.
It made an impression on him too,
Yeah,
didn't
it did.
Yeah.
Because parents can tend to try to bail their kids out. That's not safe.
That's so good.
Yeah.
It's not safe
It's
to
not
bail
safe.
your kids
No,
out.
they need to learn their actions have value, either negative or positive. And so they need to not be protected, but they need to suffer the consequences of their action with a very supportive parent alongside them. And that will enable them to learn how to deal with failure and get back up.
Right,
right. Young people, teenagers particularly, and middle schoolers need hope. They need to know that this tragedy, this crisis, is not going to always feel this horrible.
That is incredibly true, right? And I think too, as parents, we can take such comfort knowing when they do get caught, or when the world has gotten to them, that this is why Jesus came.
Yes, that's great. Yes,
Right,
it is. That's why
right.
he came.
Because we need him.
We
And
need him.
We'd be lost without him.
We would, and I don't know how you raise kids without him.
Well, I don't know either. That is it.
And it's Anna, you have a story of your own about this, because you had to raise your children for most of their life by themselves.
Yes, yeah. And gosh, it's been 10 years since my husband passed away, and I spent some time back in the fall when the 10th anniversary was coming back up reading through my journals that I had written in the years after that he died.
And how old were the kids when he died?
9, 12, and 13, all boys. And he had been sick for about 15 months. And he was a great dad. Left a big hole when he was gone. But he taught them to love Jesus, and he loved Jesus. And so there's hope. Like you said, kids need hope.
Yes.
And at those really tender ages, having the hope of heaven was tremendous. One of them did say to me one day, because we talked so often about how Dad was in heaven, one of them said, "Mom, you're supposed to be more excited to see Jesus than Dad when we get to heaven."
Oh, I love that honesty. That's so great.
He's kind of the one that always pulls us back to reality. That was. But going back and reading those journals and thinking through the last 10 years, when he died, I really did not know how we were going to make it. And how I was going to raise 3 boys without a dad. And we were all so broken and sad.
Yeah.
I did not know. And so many of the fears and concerns and worries that I had, I can now see where God was there. He hasn't let us down not one time. Even when it took time to see where he was going, what was going on. And sometimes it took years to see, people in grief struggle. And we struggled for a long time, and we still have scars.
Yes.
But God has been so faithful, and we have had a church love us well, and friends love us well, inside and outside of the church. We have had so much community. His family, my family, my kids, we have a beautiful life.
That's so great.
We really do, and that is God alone.
And it sounds like it's God and then God's community.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'd be toast without God's people.
We all would.
Right. Yeah. So
would.
we've had just so much support. So I'm incredibly grateful to God that we have testimony, and we can say without a doubt, He is good. He is
that's
good.
Wonderful.
Really good. So yeah. So. As you and I have talked before, a lot of parents really do fear having to raise children on their own, whether they fear losing a spouse to death or even divorce, or there's all kinds of circumstances that can happen. And after my husband died, I even got a couple of letters from people saying, "You are living my worst fear, but you are showing me that God will bring me through. So even if it does happen, that God has got us, has got my family,
Yes.
even if something terrible does happen." And that's absolutely true. I found that to be 100% reliable. So God to be
People
100%.
need to hear that from you because you've got the story to back it up.
Well, yes, and I could tell the stories of the tough times too.
Yes.
There were definitely days where I was like, Lord, I do not know how this is ever going to be any better. One of my prayers was that my boys would really feel like they were on the same team. They were the only 3 people in the world who lost that dad. And he was my husband. I lost him too, but it's a different relationship.
Right.
And I would say for the rest of your lives, you guys, you're the only 3 in the world that know exactly what it feels like to lose your dad.
Yes.
So you guys have to be on each other's team. And really during the pandemic, everybody ended up at home, which was they're older now, so they're mostly out of the house. The youngest was still home, but everybody was home. And Susan and I got to see it. They are on the same team.
Isn't that God's blessing?
Wow.
Some good things have come from the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah. I got to see it, and they got to have time together at a stage of life where
They wouldn't
at their ages they would
have.
normally have been under the same roof.
Yeah.
And it was a tremendous
What a
blessing.
sweet blessing.
So God has been good to the Harris family. I can tell you that. So as He has to yours, one of the fears I really didn't have until my kids were older. This sort of developed as they started making their own decisions. Once they get behind the wheel of a car and drive away from your house, things really change.
They do.
And one of the fears that developed as they got older was the worry that their own sin patterns or their own weaknesses and flaws would be beyond God's reach. That was a fear I didn't see coming until my kids got a little bit older, or that really that they would not listen to the Holy Spirit that I knew was speaking to them, but that they would shut His voice down and do what they wanted to do anyway. What would you say to parents who have those kinds of fears?
I think those fears every parent has, really.
Right.
And, we fear that we're going to have a prodigal. We fear that they're going to get in real trouble. We fear all of those things. And again, I think one of the things that keeps coming back to me is that God has given us our children, the very specific children, in the very specific birth order, with the very particular personalities, not merely so that we can raise them, because that's where we're focused, but also in order that they would be His tools in our life to grow us up into the people He's created us to be. And it may be that child we just don't connect with. We don't get that child. Or it may be that strong-willed toddler. Or it may be that child that is so much like us, we see all of our flaws just blatantly. But God will use each of those children to mature us. And so I think we have to go back to sort of a question I would call a background question is, okay, God, what can I learn about this child and our relationship or this situation that would help me see how big you are? And so often I get, when fear overwhelms me, it's because my issue or my fear has gotten bigger in my head than my God. And I need to go back and focus on how big God is. And what does that look like is a good question. What it looks like is reciting and reading over and over again his character traits. You are like God, and in you there's no darkness at all. Father, nothing is hidden from you. You know what that child is doing, and nothing is hidden from you. Father, you who created the mountains and the seas and the volcanoes, you have the power to get that child. You're the Father who loves to go after lost sheep. And so what helps me in my fear is to build up my picture of an almighty big God. Because otherwise we'll drown, especially if we have a big imagination, we'll drown under fear. And so the way to overcome fear is not to fight it so much as it is to look at the character of God. And then our fears will begin to diminish.
That's such a good word.
We never get there. Let me quickly say that. We never get there. It's a process, and God's working at us in process our whole lives. A few years ago, we have a grandson who had to have a liver transplant, and he was near death. And I was terrified. We were gathered in the hospital. It was very sudden disease. And as we heard the helicopter landing on the roof, he was 6 at the time, bringing a transplant from someone who had died. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And he made it through the transplant, and he's recovered, and he's doing well. But that night, as we were praying with family and friends in the chapel of the hospital all through the night, and it just came to me, we can lose everything. As you've experienced, you've lost a husband. We can lose everything, but the one thing we can't lose is Emmanuel, I am with you. And that's the one thing we can count on. He's with us. He's with me. He's a with you God. I'm a with you God. And that's the one certainty we have no matter what we experience. And to give a positive spin on that, we have the hope of heaven. Yes. And that's what makes it, things will be made well in heaven.
Yes. Oh, amen. Amen. Oh, I love seeing the opportunity in the relationship that's a little more challenging, or the season with one child or another that's a little more challenging, to draw closer to God, and then when you do connect with that child, it is a little glimpse of heaven.
It is.
when God brings you through those tough
when He brings
seasons.
you through. Yes.
Yeah. Susan, I've just loved being with you.
Well, I've loved it
It's
too.
been really, really
It's
fun.
been a sweet time, and I love what God has done in your life. It's an inspiration to me.
Well,
to see His faithfulness.
Your life has inspired many people. So thank you. Thank you for joining us, the Rooted Parent Podcast. And we appreciate your being here. And you can find us on iTunes and wherever you like to get your podcasts. Y'all have a great day.